Hello and welcome back to my channel. I'm Sarah if you're new here, and today we're going to be going over my 5 tips to becoming a successful graphic designer. So whether you are wanting to do freelance or you're wanting to work in a studio or agency, and whether you are wanting a formal education or if you're wanting to be self-taught, whatever the case may be, I'm going to give you guys a lot of great tips to becoming a successful graphic designer. So for a bit of backstory, I'm Sarah, as you maybe or maybe don't know. I'm a graphic designer that specializes in brand and packaging design. I studied communication design, specializing in graphic design, and then minoring in cinematic arts, which I don't really use my minor. And I've worked a few internships. I've worked in an award-winning design studio, and then I've also done freelancing, which is what I currently do. So I feel like I have a wide variety of skills, and hopefully I can share lots of knowledge as to how I got here. And yeah, I think now more than ever, people are working from home and taking up more entrepreneurial positions and kind of shooting for the stars and achieving their dreams. And so I feel like now is the time to do it. I feel like 2022 is a great year to pursue your design career. And the great thing about design is I feel like you don't need a degree to be successful. And I'm going to give you guys some of those tips. So tip number 1, or step number 1, whatever you want to call it, is learning the skills. And this is kind of common knowledge, but I think it's important to reiterate. You need to learn those skills to become a great graphic designer. And there is 2 ways you can do that, obviously. So you can go the more conventional route and get a formal education, a design degree of some sort, or you can become self-taught. And I think both are great options. They both have pros and cons, but you can be a successful graphic designer and a professional graphic designer doing either way. So first off, if you want to get a formal education, I recommend doing a lot of research into what the best design schools are. I wouldn't recommend just going to the closest university near you. I would recommend doing your research on the design programs and making sure that they have good professors and that there's people coming out of that school that are actually going on to being successful designers, because the last thing you'd want is to spend a bunch of money on an education that you're not happy with. And there's a lot of great tools online to searching best schools for certain degrees, so you can use those tools as well. An important thing to ask yourself when deciding whether you want to get a formal education or whether you want to be self-taught is, do you have the discipline to be self-taught? Because for me, I admire those who are self-taught, because I don't think I would be where I am today without my education. But in saying that, I know that there are a lot of people who are extremely disciplined and have a passion to learn graphic design and can do it on their own, and that's definitely a viable option as well. And so if you are going the self-taught route, I would recommend emulating a traditional structure, like an experience that would have been had in university studying a design course. So I would give yourself timelines and schedules, things you want to learn, make an entire list of all the things you want to learn and tick off those things off the list. The last thing you want to do is kind of jump the gun and dive right into a program and try to just emulate someone else's art. You want to learn from the ground up, essentially. So I would recommend places like Skillshare is great. You can take courses from very start to very end, and it walks you through. You can just follow along with the tutorials. YouTube is obviously also a great resource. Even Adobe Lives. I actually did an Adobe Live recently walking through my entire creative process. I'll link it in my bio, but stuff like that, just watching those even in the background can be super helpful. At this point, if you are very starting off from the very start and have no experience with any Adobe programs, I would learn the fundamentals, and by that I mean learn hierarchy, repetition, pattern, color theory, things like that. My entire first year of university, we barely used Adobe at all. We were just using notebooks and pens and paper and learning that way. Then after that, you can go on to learning the Adobe programs or alternative programs if you don't have the budget for Adobe, but most professionals do use Adobe, so if you have the budget, I would recommend using Adobe. And I would just recommend using Illustrator and Photoshop first, primarily Illustrator if you want to be a brand designer or any sort of freelance graphic designer, really, because Illustrator I feel like is what is used majority of the time. So I would definitely recommend learning Illustrator and then Photoshop. InDesign is something you can learn later on. I use InDesign maybe once a month. I rarely ever use InDesign, so I would just take it step by step and just learn those 2 programs first. I would also recommend, if you have the option to, taking some local design courses. You don't need to get an entire education, but you can just take maybe say 1 or 2 design courses at potentially your local community college or something like that. I actually did that when I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do with my career. I just took some classes, I think it was at a local community college and it was just like learning the Adobe programs essentially. And that was a huge help for me because it's so hard to learn these complex programs through like YouTube tutorials and things like that. So if you can be in person learning, even if it's just for like a little short class that you join once a week, that can be super helpful to learning these programs as well. In this first step, I would highly recommend not to niche down and push a style on yourself. Just keep everything really broad. Make sure you're exploring everything. The worst thing you can do for yourself is try to develop a very specific style, because then you're just limiting yourself and limiting your potential, and you may accidentally be emulating somebody else's design too much. Another quick tip would be to try daily challenges like a poster a day challenge or 36 days of type. That way you're designing every single day, and it starts to become very intuitive for you, and you'll learn a lot quicker that way. I think those are super helpful and fun challenges. Lastly, I would say it's so important to not just design things that look pretty and learn how to design things that look pretty, but actually learn how to design things that communicate, because design serves a purpose, and its purpose is visual communication. We're telling things to consumers and persuading people. And so I think the most important thing you can learn from this stage when you're learning the fundamentals is to learn how to communicate through design and what your design is conveying to the consumers. Now for step number 2, or tip number 2, that is building your portfolio. So once you've become somewhat confident in your skills, you can begin to build your portfolio. A portfolio is a great way to show your work to potential employers or potential clients. And I would highly recommend designing a website, because this is the easiest way for people to find your portfolio. All they need is the link. So I would recommend using something like Squarespace or Wix. They're super straightforward, and I think with these templates, they're super minimal and clean typically, and so it allows your work to speak for itself, and you don't need to worry about the design of the website, because these places like Squarespace and Wix basically do it all for you. I think I had the problem when I was a designer looking for internships. I tried to kind of like make my own WordPress site, and I did use a template, but I customized it so much to where it just looked really ugly and horrible, because I was like, oh, this cool portfolio, I want it to be really, you know, crazy and loud, and I wanted to show my design skills, but it actually just looked bad. So I would recommend using just a really clean and minimal template to play it safe. Here are some of my favorite Squarespace and Wix templates. Also, a good thing to note is I wouldn't worry too much about developing a personal brand just yet until you're on that stage where you decide whether you want to work at a design studio or freelance, because when people are hiring you, they don't really care that much about the visual brand you've developed for yourself or having a logo or things like that. I think as long as you have like a solid portfolio, that's the most important part. So for your portfolio, I would say about 6 to 8 case studies is good. If you don't have that many that you're happy with, even 5 is good, but I'd say 6 to 8 would be ideal. And for your case studies, make sure that they are a fully formed case study. And what I mean by that is these case studies don't need to be real world projects, but they should emulate real world projects. So say you have a case study where you designed brand and packaging design for a soap brand. You'd want to have the logos and the sub logo and mock-ups, so mock-ups of the packaging and maybe some business cards and things like that. So build it out as if it is a real brand, because if you just have case studies and then when you click on the case study and there's just 1 image or 2 images, it doesn't really tell the full story, and it leaves the viewer wanting more. So you want to tell this full story, build a big picture, and yeah, make it believable. I also will say I've had a lot of professors tell us as students that we need to have real world projects in our portfolio, but for one, sometimes that's unrealistic because some of us maybe aren't at that point where we've done real world projects yet because we're just starting out. And then for some people, maybe we have had a few projects at little internships here and there, but the projects themselves just aren't that interesting. I know that was the case for me. I was trying to put real world projects into my portfolio as a design student, and the projects just weren't that cool compared to my personal projects, in my opinion. They were very like intern-y type tasks, and so there wasn't much to show for. And I think in that instance, show your personal work if you're not proud of your real world projects or if you haven't done any, because creative directors really couldn't care less whether your project is real or not. They just want to see your skills and what you're best at. So more than anything, I would just create some really awesome case studies that show what you're great at. Also a quick tip, it's great to have mock-ups in there and mock up your work onto the mock-ups. Great places to find mock-ups are Creative Market, Etsy, believe it or not, is a great place for mock-ups. and yellow images if you just want like packaging. Once you've built your beautiful, lovely portfolio, you'll move on to step or tip number 3, which is getting real world experience. And I know if you are wanting to pursue freelance, you may not want to do this step or think that this step is relevant because you think, okay, now I'm ready for freelance, I've got my portfolio. But I would highly recommend getting some real world experience regardless of what route you want to take. And the reason for that is because working with designers and senior designers and creative directors and things like that, you will learn so much more than you will have ever learned in all of your self-taught experience or all of your formal education. So being an intern can teach you so much more than all of that because you see how things actually function in the real world and how these deadlines work and how the business side of things work as well. So if you're wanting to be a freelancer, it's great to be in a studio to see how the business side of things works, which is super important. So regardless of what direction you want to go, I would recommend getting like 1 to 2 internships just so that you can gain more experience. And I know that first step to getting your very first internship can be extremely hard when you don't have a resume built up yet and your portfolio is very new. So it can be tricky, but I would recommend the number one thing is just to think, how can I stand out from others? How are others applying to this job? And how can I make myself different and stand out and catch their attention? On that note, I've made a video documenting how to get a design job. It also entails how to get internships. I'll link it somewhere up here if you want to check that out. And basically I kind of go more in depth on how to actually get a design job and land that role, or like a design internship. It kind of is the same thing. But one tip I don't think I mentioned in that video is if you are financially able and are okay with this, first of all, I think all interns should always be paid. I think employers should always pay their interns, but if you do find a role that is unpaid or you're willing to be unpaid, a great way to position yourself is just as a volunteer. You can say no to a volunteer because volunteers are the same thing as unpaid interns. It's just like a different title, but it's literally the same thing. But a volunteer, the word volunteer just sounds a lot less intimidating and it sounds more welcoming and chill as opposed to, hey, can I be an intern? Because that sounds like a big ask and there's more expectations involved. Whereas a volunteer, it's like, of course I want volunteers for my company. How could I say no to that? Also, I know it's like such a nerve-wracking experience taking those first steps and getting that first internship. I know when I did, I was like doubting myself and my abilities, and just know that you don't need to be a good designer to get an internship role. I was not good at all when I got my first internship. I think they just want to see ambition in somebody who can churn out some simple work. If I can find my portfolio that I got my first internship with, I'll insert it here. It was horrendous, but I got the role. So if I can do it, you can definitely do it. So once you've got your beautiful portfolio built, you've got a little bit of real world experience, the next step would be to broaden your strengths and establish a point of difference. What I mean by that is to firstly broaden your strengths, so explore more programs and more skills that you can learn. So maybe you want to learn After Effects and get into animation. You could be a graphic designer that specializes in animation, or you could have both those skills up your sleeve. Or maybe you want to learn illustration as well, because that's a great skill to accompany your design skills. Whatever it may be, I think it's great to broaden your strengths, but also niche down at the same time and start to slowly feel out if a style is coming or starting to evolve and emerge. I think having a style is much more important if you're wanting to pursue freelance, because people will want to search for you and your specific style and want that type of work from you. Whereas if you're wanting to work at a design studio or agency, they more so want to see that you have a variety of skill sets and you can use your variety of skill sets to take on many different projects, because likely that design studio will have a variety of different clients with different needs. I think in this step it's important to ask yourself, why do people want me? Why am I different, and what makes me different and unique? And I think it's important to just, establish a point of difference, have something unique to offer to the table, and then people will definitely want you. For me, I angled myself as a graphic designer that can also do illustration and animation. So yeah, I think that people wanted me a bit more because I did more than just design. I could offer more to a studio than just a standard graphic designer could. I could do those illustration projects, I could do those logo animation projects, and I was just a more valuable asset than somebody who just did graphic design exclusively. The last and final step to the piece of becoming a successful graphic designer is to start making moves. So now would be the time, if you haven't thought about it already, to start deciding whether you want to go the freelance route or whether you want to work at a design studio or agency. For me, I saw it more beneficial to work at a design studio for a few years first, because I feel like it helped me to grow my skills a lot more. And now that I'm a freelancer, I'm very grateful for that experience, and I definitely don't think I would be where I am today if it wasn't for working in a design studio or design studios. But you can always go the freelance route. If you've done internships and you feel confident and comfortable doing freelance, you can definitely go that route. So we'll start there. If you want to do freelance, I would say the first step to doing that is building your online presence. So through Instagram, TikTok, whatever it may be. I think the more platforms, the better. Pinterest even is great. That is such a huge way that you can become a successful freelancer, and that's actually how I did. So I was working in a design studio and was building my following on the side just for fun. I was just doing personal projects, and I started to grow a following and had lots of people start reaching out to me, wanting me to take on projects with them. It got to the point where I realized I could be making more money freelancing than actually working a 9-to-5 in a design studio. And so thankfully it was a very natural transition for me, because I just had clients coming to me already. And I think that's like the ideal position to be in, is just you don't need to be reaching out to people because people are just coming to you. So if you can, I would definitely recommend starting an Instagram and a TikTok and posting your work. It's okay if you're not that proud of your work, just keep posting and you'll get better and better. I look back at my old work on my Instagram and I'm like, oh, I just want to archive it, but I think it's good to have that presence and stuff. So that would probably be honestly the number one step for freelancing, is just to build your online presence. Also, in terms of the social media, I would recommend putting out work into the world that you would like to be real work. So put out imaginary case studies that you've just made up, but things that you would like to do in reality with real clients. So for example, for me, I was doing a lot of skincare branding and packaging projects just for fun, just for content for TikTok and Instagram. And then after I started posting those, I was having lots of people inquire about if I could brand their skincare branding and packaging, and now I'm working with an actual skincare brand. I think what you put out into the world is what you will receive. I think putting out imaginary case studies is a great way to show the world what you're capable of and what you can do. Another thing you can do is you can actually reach out to local design studios and agencies. In fact, it doesn't even need to be local. Just reach out to some of your favorite design studios and agencies and let them know that you were available for contract work, which basically just means they would just contract you for specific projects. So you're not locked in with that company, you're still classified as a freelancer, but they may call you and use you for specific projects, which is really cool. And if you have a specific skill set, that can also be a great way to do contract work. The last step for freelancing is knowing how to conduct business professionally. I think this can really make or break it for a client. So they want to see that you've got your contracts ready to go and your onboarding process is smooth, and you've got your invoices ready to go, and your portfolio looks great for them, and just your entire process is super streamlined for them, so that they can put the trust in you that you're going to do a good job. So I think it's super important to make sure you know how to conduct business professionally. Second section of this last step is if you want to go the design studio route or design agency route. With this step, I think it's super important to understand what type of company you want to work at first. So just making sure that company culture aligns with your interests, the company's kind of aesthetic, I guess, if they do have an aesthetic, and what they specialize in. So making sure all of that, and even the size of the company. Do you want to work in a really intimate setting with 5 or 6 people, or do you want to work with 20, 30 people or even larger? Those are things that are super important to ask yourself. Another thing to ask yourself is if you want to work in-house or if you want to work at an actual studio or agency. So what in-house means is you are working for a specific company and fulfilling only their design needs. So you could be an in-house graphic designer at Google, or an in-house graphic designer at your favorite makeup company like Rare Beauty or something like that. So it depends on if you want to continue to do the same design work for the same brand, which for me personally, I thought would be quite repetitive. So I didn't want to go that route, but there are benefits to going that route, or going to a design studio agency where they have a variety of different clients with different needs. And once you found a handful of design companies that you want to work at, the next step would be reaching out to them. Again, I made a video on how to land a design job, so I definitely recommend to check that out. It goes like a lot more in depth on how to land a design job. But kind of a recap, essentially, it's super important to reach out in a way that is really unique and eye-catching. Don't just flick them an email. Even if it's a great email, it's probably gonna get just pushed down in their emails. So I would recommend doing something a little bit unconventional. Maybe just show up at their studio and say, hey, could I have a quick tour? Or could we schedule a meeting for a tour? Put them on the spot a little bit. It's harder for them to say no if you put somebody on the spot, whereas if they have time to consider you and ponder you over email, it's a lot easier for them to just say no or ignore you. But yeah, I think just try to stand out and show them why you would be like a huge value to their team. Yeah, hopefully it all works out. So that is my 5 steps to becoming a successful graphic designer. I hope you enjoyed and found this helpful. If you have any other questions or like thoughts, definitely leave them down below. I definitely recommend you follow me on Instagram if you want to see more of my content. I'm a lot more active on there. And subscribe if you want to see more videos from me. I'm thinking I will be making, hopefully soon, a video of my entire creative process. So stay tuned for that, and I'll see you next time.